And this is NPR News. I'm Mike Mulcahy. Thanks for tuning in today. Come November 6th, voters will decide who will serve in each of Minnesota's 8 congressional districts for the next 2 years. Between now and Election Day, we will host a series of meetings between the major party candidates for those seats. Today, we start with Minnesota's 4th congressional district, which covers the East Metro area, including all of St. Paul and its northern and eastern suburbs, all the way to the St. Croix River. Since 2001, the seat has been held by Democrat Betty McCollum. She is a member of the House Appropriations Committee, and before she was elected to the U.S. House, served 4 terms as a state representative. Her Republican opponent this year is Greg Ryan, who also ran 2 years ago. Greg Ryan lives in Roseville and, with his family, owns and operates the Ryan Plumbing and Heating Company. Thanks to both candidates for being here. I wonder if we could just forego the opening statements, and I'll just ask, why should voters elect you? And let's start with Greg Ryan.
Well, I've got 34 years of experience in running a business since my father's tragic passing. And I just been watching the 4th District be just at a stable position. The Congresswoman has been there, been a 32-year politician, 2 years less than I have been a business owner. So that's where we're going at. And of the late, a lot of these things that have been taking place recently in the news about Keith Ellison, I'd really like to know her position on where she sits and where she believes Keith Ellison should testify or have an FBI interview. So that's kind of where I'm at with wanting to represent the 4th District.
Okay, Betty McCollum, why should voters elect you to another term?
Well, it's been an honor to serve, and as has been pointed out, I had the privilege of serving on the city council in North St. Paul while I was a substitute teacher, and then when I served in the Minnesota State House, which is a part-time position, I was a retail manager at Sears at Maplewood Mall. So all the experience that I have had, both at a local government level and at a state level, I took with me to Congress. And so when I've been out door knocking, people are asking me to go to make sure that I'm fighting to make sure that their health care pre-existing conditions are covered. They want to see smart investments made in transit and transportation. They're very concerned about, parents, the cost of college and the educational system here, and want someone who will work with state and local officials to make sure that we're moving Minnesota forward. And I'm also hearing at the door, and I'm very, very much in favor of doing this, is holding this administration accountable for a lot of the corruption that I just saw straight out as a ranking member on the Interior Subcommittee of Appropriations with all the things that Administrator Scott Pruitt of the EPA was doing to, in my opinion, and he resigned, defraud taxpayers.
Okay, we'll get to President Trump and we'll get to Keith Ellison in just a minute, but let me ask first, Betty McCollum, stay with you. You voted against the Republican bill that cut taxes that passed last year. Why did you vote against that bill?
Well, that bill had several things wrong with it. One of the opportunities that could have happened with the tax bill would have been with the Republicans working with the Democrats. Democrats were totally shut out of the process. And even as the bill was being written and voted on in the Senate, they were writing things in the margin. So it didn't have the oversight, it didn't have the scrutiny that it deserved. And so now the Republicans have a tax bill that's going to add almost $2 trillion to what the American people will have in the debt over the next 10 years. And so now my Republican colleagues are saying, well, we have to come up with money to pay for these tax cuts somehow. So they're talking about cuts to Social Security. They're talking about cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, which our seniors here in Minnesota and around the country rely upon in order to live lives of dignity after they retire. And I'm just not going to be part of that.
Greg Ryan, would you have voted for the tax cut bill?
I would have, and I don't think it went far enough. All we need to do is look at the economy and the way it is just roaring. We are at an all-time low as far as unemployment applications. We're at an all-time high for minorities being employed. All of the Minnesota is at about 3% unemployment rate. We're at about a 20-year low as far as unemployment. So I believe that this just started in the last year or two after the administration took over. So I think that this is a sign of the robust economy due to the strong leadership that we have in Washington and the way we are moving forward. So that's the way I see it, and I'm feeling it because I am in business and I do talk to the people out in the 4th District. So I'm still curious about Betty's position on Keith Ellison.
Okay, we'll get to that. But would you pledge to protect Medicare and Social Security if it's proposed to cut those?
Social Security, yes. Medicare, I believe that Congressman Walz, through the state, if he becomes the governor, he would like to have Medicaid for all, which is not good because it really gives us zero choice. We're starting to experience less choice when it comes to health care costs.
Okay. Betty McCollum, it sounds like you would pledge to not cut Medicare or Social Security.
No, I mean Social Security and is stable for us, until 2026, and Medicaid for a while after that. There do need to be some reforms that are made, and one of the reforms that we can do is rein in the cost of prescription drugs to help lower the cost of Medicare and Medicaid, and for all people who are buying prescription drugs. But I want to go back to the economy, because the people who have benefited the most under the tax cuts have been the upper 1% of Americans, and corporations. And corporations took the money that they're receiving back in the tax cuts. The thought was that they were going to be reinvesting in our communities, reinvesting in their businesses. Instead, they've been doing stock buyouts, which only benefits them more. And people I'm talking with at the door, they're very concerned. They haven't seen their wages go up in decades. They're working. They're grateful they're working. They know the unemployment here in Minnesota, the unemployment rate is low, but they're not feeling the same success that the corporations and businesses are. So, and some of them still are very concerned about housing and being able to have affordable housing. So most of the folks that I've been talking to out in the suburb, they're feeling like they're kind of walking on eggshells right now when it comes to the economy. It's good, but it's not as good as it should be for them.
Greg Ryan,
that's just wrong. She's been out of touch as far as the economy goes. I'm out there trying to solicit customers to convince them to hire me. Every time I turn around and look for an employee, I have to pay more money. So we are actually offering more salary, as is a lot of other employers, just because of the scarcity of talent. When we go out there to try and find talent for our businesses, we are faced with raising scales or raising rates in order to attract better talent. And as far as the 1%, those are the people that are hiring the small businesses. Those are the people that are adding on to the plant. Those are the people that are buying the equipment. Those are the people that are positioning themselves to be better performers with the artificial intelligence and a lot of the robotics that they do implement into their industries and their businesses. So that 1% of the people are basically one of the largest employers for small companies.
Betty McCollum?
Well, I mean, the facts are there. The corporations are doing stock buyouts. It's been reported in all the trade journals and that. And teachers, nurses, people who work in retail, they aren't seeing their wages go up. They're not being able to keep up with inflation, and they're not being able to put away for their retirement the way they'd like to. What they have seen, for those who want to send and help with their young adult children, either go to vocational trade school or for college, they're seeing that ability to help their children take the next step to become part of a society with great opportunity is really being out of their reach, because they're seeing college and trade school costs go up, and they're not seeing their wages go up so they can help their children attain the next step towards the American dream.
Betty McCollum, you said a few months ago that you thought President Trump should be impeached. Do you still feel that way, and why?
I think we should look. I think we should be very serious about looking at moving forward on articles of impeachment, and it should go to the Judiciary Committee. We need to hold President Trump accountable. This is the first president in my lifetime that hasn't turned over their tax records. There's very serious concerns that we have about the emoluments clause and the amount of money that's going back into his business, whether it's Trump Hotels, the time that he spends in Mar-a-Lago, or his other business in New Jersey, and the whole family's employed up there, pretty much at the White House. So he has not done what other presidents have done in the past with their businesses, and the Republicans have refused on party line votes to look at the president's taxes. If there's nothing there, then the president should turn his taxes over so the American people know that the president is living within the spirit and the law, which is spelled out very clearly in the U.S. Constitution when it comes to emoluments.
Greg Ryan, where do you stand on President Trump?
There's so much divide happening. I am in full support of President Trump and the way he's doing his business. You have to look at a lot of the way the administration is moving. Now, if Ms. McCollum is concerned about impeaching Mr. Trump, then she should apply that same thing to Keith Ellison and Ms. Monahan, who lodged these accusations about domestic abuse, and she has not publicly said anything about the allegations that are lodged against her CD4 partner, her congressional friend, who she has campaigned with. I have heard nothing about where she stands on that particular situation.
Well, Betty McCollum, here's your chance. Are you backing Keith Ellison for Minnesota Attorney General?
Well, these allegations that came out just literally days before the election, Keith has addressed them, and so has the young woman who alleges that she was abused and mistreated. She needs to be heard, and there needs to be transparency in what's happening, whether it is what's happening with Judge Kavanaugh right now. We had instances even here at NPR with Garrison Keillor and that. We as a society have to make sure women's voices are heard, and there's a way when these sexual abuse, because a lot of these aren't criminal cases, right? When there's sexual abuse cases, that victims can come forward, and they can come forward in a way that they know is safe, in a way that they will be heard, and then we have to figure out as a society how we move forward with these allegations. I've worked with this in the military with sexual assault and sexual abuse as a member of Congress, and we've gotten the military to kind of turn around its attitude on that. We're seeing improvements there. We're seeing it in the private sector. We've seen it in the media. It's just CBS was the latest. This is a systemic problem in our country, in the way gender relations need to be handled in a way that is fair and respectful. And the reason why I haven't commented is I haven't spoken to the young woman involved. The Republicans, if they were serious about this, doing something about this, Mr. Ryan's party could file an ethics complaint against Mr. Ellison, and it could be brought up. To date, they haven't done that. So there is recourse in ways in which it can be handled. And we saw with Mr. Franken, he wanted to go to the ethics committee, and he wasn't given an opportunity to do that. And a lot of people think everybody should have their chance to have their voice heard.
Based on what you've heard about the Keith Ellison situation, will you support him for Minnesota Attorney General?
Well, I think that's going to be up to the voters. I mean, I'm just one vote. I really think that we need to make sure that we have all the evidence laid out in front of us. I think there's ways in which the woman who's made these accusations with the tape and that could find a third party, a retired judge or somebody, and validate her story more. She needs to be heard. She needs to believe, and I want to make sure that she's able to do that in a safe spot. So, and I think the politicians shouldn't be involved in doing that. I think we need to come up with a society way to remedy and have people make sure that they're being listened to and that everybody's being treated fairly with dignity and respect.
And Greg Ryan, based on what you say about Keith Ellison, what about Judge Brett Kavanaugh? Should he be approved for the Supreme Court with this allegation hanging over his head.
Okay, talking about the Supreme Court nomination, it's almost been like a circus that the Democrats have been partaking in. At the beginning, the Democrats coordinated along with media about this disruption during the process that took place. This is unprecedented. This is what the Democrats do when they don't get their way. At the 12th hour, they brought up this Dr. Ford about these allegations at the 12th hour. They've been holding on to this information for close to 4 months or 6 months. So I think that
I thought it was in July that the allegation was went to Senator Feinstein.
Feinstein should have disclosed that to the ranking person right out of the gate, and she didn't. She waited until the 12th hour. Maybe it was July, but somebody had this information long before that the Judiciary panel had.
I'm just trying to find out, though, because there have been allegations made against President Trump, too. Do you hold Keith Ellison to a different standard than you do to other people who have been accused of sexual misconduct?
I don't. But there has been zero investigation going on with Keith Ellison. The people should actually ask for the FBI to do an investigation. This Miss Monahan apparently has a video of the incident, and the son actually had some audio that he passed over onto Facebook or something like that, but it seems like we're not getting a whole lot of information out of that. If Ms. McCollum could actually request the FBI to do some sort of an investigation into Keith Ellison's action, the accusation of domestic abuse, I think this can clear the air. I mean, he is seeking one of the highest attorneys generals in the state, so I think that we need to pay close attention to that. If he wants to enforce the laws in the state of Minnesota, we have to make sure that he plays by the rules that he would impose.
Betty McCollum, I'll let you respond, then we'll move on.
Well, Judge Kavanaugh's appointment is going to be for a lifetime. And if voters after this election, if Keith were to become the Attorney General, there would be something that would come to light. They would have the ability to take action and do something. So I really think that these are two different examples of a larger problem. And I'll go back to it again. It starts with military assault. It starts with what happens in the workplace, and I've been a victim of it as a woman. So I take this very seriously, that women need to be heard, women need to be listened to, but we need to have a process. We as a society need to come up with a process when it isn't in a court system, of a way of making sure that things are adjudicated and that we move forward. What I hope happens is maybe this conversation isn't taking place 20 years from now. I'd like to say 2 years from now this conversation wouldn't take place. But as a person who's been a victim of it myself in the workplace, it is something I take very seriously.
Let's just move to some other issues. Greg Ryan, it seems that hardly a week goes by that you don't hear about one of these mass shootings. I think we've had 2 this week, one in Wisconsin, one in Maryland. Do you think the federal government needs to do anything to change gun laws?
Well, as soon as we start looking at the First Amendment to change the First Amendment, then we can proceed to the Second Amendment to change that. Other than that, I wouldn't want to see any changes in the federal law. The states have those rights to make their gun laws different and more stringent. But when it comes to the federal level, my father was held up, shot, and murdered at our plumbing store 34 years ago. So I am a victim of a murdered father. So I can speak from experience that had he had protection then, he would still be with us if God granted him that length.
Betty McCollum, any legal changes, any law changes at the federal level about guns?
Well, first off, losing your father in such a tragic circumstance is something that Mr. Ryan's talked about before, and for the loss for your family. Once again, my sympathies and my condolences. And I have nothing against people having hunting rifles or people having guns for self-protection. But with that, I think we can make some changes to make sure that things don't happen, these mass shootings, especially in our schools. Universal background checks to make sure that people will be responsible gun owners to have access to guns. What we're seeing with these bump stocks still have, we should, everybody after that happened, the massive shooting out west, everybody was like, oh, we're going to ban bump stocks. We haven't done anything on that as Congress. The assault weapons ban. I mean, I serve on the Defense Committee. I know the difference between a hunting rifle, a gun for self-protection, and an assault weapon. We don't need assault weapons out in the public. The things like the fly no buy list right now, somebody can not be able to fly a plane, but they can still go fly on a plane. Because they're on a terrorist watch list, but they can go in and purchase as many guns as is allowed during a time. So there are things that we can do to reduce gun violence in this country. And I just think it's common sense to work to do that. But that doesn't mean taking guns away from people for self-protection, such as in the Ryan family case, or for people to have the right to go out and recreate, ski, shoot, or hunt. But
okay.
Guns for any reason at any time without a background check, especially assault weapons, I have a real problem with that.
Okay, let me ask about the immigration issue. Some Democrats have called for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to be abolished. Would you support that, Betty McCollum?
We need to make sure that ICE is doing its job properly. And by that, I mean we need to pass real, meaningful immigration reform. We need security at our borders. We're going to need to have, enforcement for people who are breaking our laws. I mean, so we're going to have law enforcement. But the way that this administration has, separated children and families at the borders. We had 500 children at one time separated from their parents. Only 200 of them have been returned. There's thousands of children over the past several years that have been put into foster care that the federal government doesn't even know where they are right now. So we need smart immigration policies.
Greg Ryan, what about immigration?
What we need to do is enforce the laws that are on the books right now instead of proceeding with a complete overhaul. Our immigration system is a little different than it was 30 years ago, so we really need, what hasn't been happening is full enforcement of the federal laws on immigration, and it has expanded, so we need to not expand it as much and keep it back to the way and enforce it the way it is now before we decide changing anything in the future. So that's my feeling on that.
What about the president's position on tariffs and trade? It looks like we're in a trade war now. Do you back the president on his tariffs?
I do, and I'll tell you why. The tariffs are a tool to bring the playing field down to a level game. Right now, the United States, I can understand if I'm negotiating with three different people or if I negotiated with one person. It makes it almost twofold or threefold complex when you're dealing with three different nations or more. So when it comes to the trade, his ultimate goal would be to reduce it down to zero trade deficits, zero tariffs, and that's what we have to do. I look out in the parking lot and I look at all of the foreign cars, and when I go buy plumbing parts, I see this made in China, and it really bothered me a lot that us consumers, we love spending money. And we don't like spending a lot. We like getting a good deal. And if we are getting products from out of the country, us as Americans, we need to have a closer look at that and pay attention to where that product is manufactured, where the money ends up at, and is it in the United States?
Betty McCollum, we're down to our last minute. Where are you on the tariffs and trade?
Well, the president doesn't seem to have a policy that anybody can follow. I mean, attacking our neighbor to the north, Canada, and some of the complications that's involving. And with even the U.S. auto industry is foolish, and it's going to make things more expensive for consumers. Certainly, we need to do something about China and stealing intellectual property. There are things we can do to improve trade, but the president going after Canada, the EU, some of our close allies, and making irrational decisions that no one can follow is just foolish and not good for our economy.
Well, I'm afraid we have to end it there. I was hoping we'd have some time for final statements, but we used up too much of our time. I really appreciate your coming by, though. DFL Congresswoman Betty McCollum, Republican Greg Ryan, running in the 4th District this year. Early voting starts today.
It does. Everybody needs to vote.
Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for listening. That's our program for today. I'm Mike Mulcahy.